he writes like nobody else writes.
What this offers a writer, for example, is not writing as writing, but writing as music. Writing as painting.
Right.
Writing as theater.
Mm-hmm.
He opens up your palette
Right,
in the biggest way.
Right, through all the comparisons and metaphors.
And the metaphors.
He reaches other planes of perception.
Again, we have it in Balbec where he's seeing as sort of in a tropical fish tank,
Mm-hmm.
where he sees
Yes.
and it's not like use of metaphor in one line, but a metaphor, pages and pages,
Right.
extending the
Right.
same metaphor, where something you wouldn't have seen suddenly when you see it through this these grand metaphors,
Mm-hmm.
It takes on a different thing. Then he used the aquatic theme again at the opera, and they're up there in their boxes.
Right. There are several passages like that which are beautiful and sometimes also very funny. I mean, we shouldn't forget that.
That he's very funny, yes.
Even though it might be intimidating because of the length of his work and the length of his sentences, he's also he has a great sense of humor. I'm thinking about the passage where people are wearing monocles and the way they look like big fish, going around. I mean, it's extremely funny if you just want to take a little bit of Proust and read Un amour de soi. I mean, that little part of Proust will make you laugh. There is no doubt about that. You know, the way that Madame Verdurin laughs so much that she stuck her jaw.
To admit you to the little nucleus, the little group, the little clan at the Verdurins, one condition sufficed, but that one was indispensable. You must give tacit adherence to the creed, one of whose articles was that the young pianist, whom Madame Verdurin had taken under her patronage that year, and of whom she said, "Really, it oughtn't to be allowed to play Wagner as well as that," left both Planté and Rubinstein sitting, while Dr. Cottard was a more brilliant diagnostician than Potin. Each new recruit whom the Verdurins failed to persuade that the evenings spent by other people in other houses than theirs were as dull as ditch water, saw himself banished forthwith. Women being in this respect more rebellious than men, more reluctant to lay aside all worldly curiosity and the desire to find out for themselves whether other drawing-rooms might not sometimes be as entertaining, and the Verdurins feeling, moreover, that this critical spirit and this demon of frivolity might, by their contagion, prove fatal to the orthodoxy of the little church, they had been obliged to expel, one after another, all those of the faithful who were of the female sex.
There is a book that just got published, when I say just, I think it was 97, called How Proust Can Change Your Life by a philosopher called Alain de Botton. And when I read this book, I recognized so much of what spending so much time with Proust had done to my own life. And it's almost like a self-help book. You know, you can look at La Recherche as a self-help book if you look at it in the same way that Alain de Botton does, which is, how to suffer successfully, how to open your eyes, how to be a good friend, how to be in love, or how to make a date, or you can look at it in several different ways, and that's why I think that I think that pretty much anybody can benefit from reading Proust if you learn how to go beyond the difficulty of it or the intimidation of such a big work, of such a famous work. Then you can actually get into what the book is about.
In terms of just looking at the paintings, looking at the art, I mean, what were some of the conclusions? What were some of the things that surprised you? What were some of the things that revealed themselves to you?
First of all, it gave me an appreciation of painting much more than I had until then, because I learned to look at paintings in a way that I hadn't done so far. As far as music is concerned, it also analyzes music in such a precise, accurate way. Because I don't know about you, but every time I listen to music, classical music, I'm overpowered by the feelings it triggers in me. But I'm not able to analyze it almost mathematically the way that Proust did.
And he worked very hard to dissect it.
Yes, and it's very difficult to do that from a work. I mean, music moves all the time, and at the time you could not stop and rewind. You had to just listen, and then from your memory of it, analyze.
Now, I don't know. One of the things that fascinated me is his fascination with music, and then it was almost as if he presupposed John Cage, where when he's back in Paris and he's opening up his windows and he's listening to the street, and he's listening to these little cacophonies and these little
Gershwin.
Gershwin, that's the same thing Gershwin picked up on.
Yes.
And Proust was able to in work, but these guys were doing it with music. This guy's doing music with words. And you're as he presents the street, what he's hearing, how he's hearing, he's teaching you how to listen.
To listen and to look, yes.
How to listen and how to look, and it was just, I'm reading this and my jaw's dropping open. I'm going,
well,
how gorgeous this is.
This is a feeling that not only people, anybody can feel that awe of such a work. But I mean, even people like Virginia Woolf said, I think, she was in her journal, I think she's saying, okay, well, I'm going to have dinner and then it will be back to writing. But since I'm reading Proust, this is so depressing, I never write like that.
But when on our way home I had caught sight of a farm on the left of the road, at some distance from two other farms which were themselves close together, and from which to return to Cambrai we need only turn down an avenue of oaks, bordered on one side by a series of orchard closes, each one planted at regular intervals with apple trees which cast upon the ground, when they were lighted by the setting sun, the Japanese stencil of their shadows. Then, sharply, my heart would begin to beat. I would know that in half an hour we should be at home, and that there, as was the rule on days when we had taken the Guermantes way, and dinner was in consequence served later than usual, I should be sent to bed as soon as I had swallowed my soup, so that my mother, kept at table, just as though there had been company to dinner, would not come upstairs to say good night to me in bed. The zone of melancholy which I then entered was totally distinct from that other zone in which I had been bounding for joy a moment earlier, just as sometimes in the sky a band of pink is separated as though by a line invisibly ruled from a band of green or black. You may see a bird flying across the pink. It draws near the borderline, touches it, enters, and is lost upon the black. The longings by which I had just now been absorbed, to go to Guermantes, to travel, to live a life of happiness, I was now so remote from them that their fulfillment would have afforded me no pleasure. How readily would I have sacrificed them all, just to be able to cry all night long in the arms of Mamma.
And as he said himself, it's not about technique, it's about vision.
I think what you say is actually very important in the way that the memory and the recapturing of memories works in La Recherche. Because if you look at, for example, Combray, which is the first part of the memories of the childhood, what you see is not so much the memory of a special moment, but the memory of something that happened frequently in the past. For example, he evokes summer afternoons where he spent the whole afternoon reading in the garden, and he would forget the notion of time, and then it's the clock, the bell was ringing 3 o'clock, and he thought it was still 1 o'clock or something like that. And so you have that whole afternoon, which is not one special afternoon in his past, but it's many summer afternoons that he spent reading. And that's what's coming back to him. And there you have also something that was very important for him was the force of habit. his routine.
Right.
He was very, very,
he was
very...
a little maniacal about his routines,
he was completely obsessed by the routine because he said that habit prevents you from suffering. It calms the pain of anything new. So, and his whole family was like that. If you remember, when they are in Combray, pretty much they have that one visitor, Swan. But when he rings the bell from the garden bell, everybody just freaks out. It's like, who is it? And they go through that motion of, okay, let's put the drinks here and I wonder who it might be. And they all know it's probably Swan, and they don't have to really fear or pretend they are drinking something or
yeah.
But they go through the ritual. It's like almost like a little scene, in the whole book, and it's hysterical, of course. But they have to have that ritual. That's true also when they have the Saturday lunch, which is an hour earlier than every day of the week.
Right.
But because it's so established, they are hungry an hour earlier. And it's really very, very well seen.
At the hour when I usually went downstairs to find out what there was for dinner, its preparation would already have begun, and Françoise, a colonel with all the forces of nature for her subalterns, as in the fairy tales where giants hire themselves out as scullions, would be stirring the coals, putting the potatoes to steam, and at the right moment finishing over the fire those culinary masterpieces which had been first got ready in some of the great array of vessels, triumphs of the potter's craft, which ranged from tubs and boilers and cauldrons and fish kettles down to jars for game, moulds for pastry, and tiny pannikins for cream, and included an entire collection of pots and pans of every shape and size. I would stop by the table where the kitchen maid had shelled them to inspect the platoons of peas drawn up in ranks and numbered like little green marbles ready for a game. But what fascinated me would be the asparagus, tinged with ultramarine and rosy pink, which ran from their heads, finely stippled in mauve and azure, through a series of imperceptible changes to their white feet, still stained a little by the soil of their garden bed. A rainbow loveliness that was not of this world.
He roots his personal aesthetics in his grandmother and in Francois, which is very interesting.
Yes.
The maid and his grandmother, of all the artistic, the great artists around him, he sees himself as, again, he's making a dress, or he's making her beef dish, or and then it's the grandmother in Cambrai who's out with the roses because it's not looking naturalistic enough. So she doesn't like anything that's not anything that's too ordered in nature, that has to be put back into its naturalistic form. And where was that coming from? I mean,
I think that for Proust, the grandmother character and Françoise represent common sense. A certain common sense that maybe the people in his social strata didn't have anymore. But they also, for Françoise is not only a cook, she's an artist herself.
Absolutely.
And when she delivers her meal, it's a masterpiece.
And he
admires that.
And he's really impressed with it.
Right.
And he spends a lot of time.
He's very able to look at any form of art and admire it.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be very, very highbrow art.
Yes, he is not a snob.
No, he's not a snob at all.
He's absolutely the opposite of that.
Right, exactly.
And there are these misperceptions. This book is effete, it's snobbish, it's aristocratic.
It's not at all a snob. He can admire the craft of somebody as simple as Françoise. Françoise, who, by the way, is not just a common sense artistic cook. She's also a very mean woman.
She's cutting the heads off the chickens, you filthy chickens.
Filthy chicken, or being very mean with our the pregnant kitchen maid, making her peel asparagus.
Jono's charity.
Yeah. She knows she's allergic to them, and she goes and.
But then she's mean with the patient, and she goes and reads the book about the maladies, and she's crying.
Yes.
And she's the mirror image of the aristocracy. She's in her own caste system.
Yes.
She's got all the prejudices of the Germans.
Absolutely.
Which
But
is interesting.
Proust said also that we are more touched, maybe sometimes, by an ad on a soap, a picture on a soap, an ad of a woman on a soap, than we are sometimes by a masterpiece, or that we are more touched by what love does to us than we would be by spending days with a genius.
Right.
So
he couldn't wait to get out of Elstere's studio to go see Albertine.
Right, exactly.
And he knew what he was seeing.
Yeah.
He wasn't even naive. He saw the beauty.
Right. And actually, what he's saying in his own life, I think that his intellectual life was very much interior, but his friends were not necessarily. He was not looking for intelligence specifically in his friends. He was looking more for kindness and other qualities.
He was looking, and he was a gossip. He was looking for.
Right.
He liked. And he didn't want to. I think the thing that kept him back as an artist, and again going back to that parody he wrote, he wanted everything. He thought everything had to be on a high plane. And he wasn't, and until he could get himself as he really was, and tell the truth about himself, which again he really never came clean, and he really had a hard time with until his parents were dead. He wasn't able to find his own voice.
Right.
Yeah.
And even it's interesting that you choose these words, because I think even in his relationships with his friends, he was not finding his own voice. I mean, he was always afraid to bore them. If he had talked about what was interesting to him, he probably would have bored everybody.
And again, he reflects himself off of Swann.
Right.
Because again, Swann never gave an opinion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he was talking about things that his friends were interested in, even if it was sports or cars, and he was not particularly fond of that. But if that's what interested his friends, that's what he could do. So in a way, he was very, very generous. And that's why at one point he said that friendship was not what it was supposed to cut out to be, because actually it's an enormous waste of time for an artist. At the same time, he was a great friend.
Now the book is. Let's talk about some of the deep sadness. The deep sadness of the book, to me, the deepest sadness is Swann, and let's contrast it against. Let's talk about the death of Swann and the death of Bergotte. The death of Bergotte, again, looking at the Vermeer, looking at a little patch of yellow in the view of Delft, and he drops dead, and then we talk about dead forever, question mark. And then the books in the windows, possibly this vision of immortality.
Yeah.
Then we have Swann, who visions not himself going on, but his daughter going on. And to speak, maybe to keep his name alive.
As for Mademoiselle de Forcheville, I could not help feeling appalled when I thought of her. What? The daughter of Swann, who would so have loved to see her at the Guermantes, for whom they had refused their great friend the favour of an invitation, they had now sought out of their own accord, time having elapsed which refashions everything for us. I recalled how to this girl Swann used to say at times as he hugged her and kissed her, "It is a comfort, my darling, to have a child like you. One day, when I am no longer here, if people still mention your poor papa, it will be only to you, and because of you." The illusions of paternal affection are perhaps no less deceiving than those of the other kind. Many girls regard their fathers only as the old men who are going to leave them a fortune. Gilberte's presence in a drawing-room, instead of being an opportunity for speaking occasionally still of her father, was an obstacle in the way of people seizing those opportunities, increasingly more rare, that they might still have had of referring to him. Even in connection with the things that he had said, the presents that he had made, people acquired the habit of not mentioning him, and she, who ought to have refreshed, not to say perpetuated, his memory, found herself hastening and completing the process of death and oblivion.
He's allowed to go to dust. His name is allowed to be forgotten. And the last wasn't Swan some adventurer. So it just goes to how we turn to dust. And so Proust holds up this one thing as, yes, this very well, maybe a book will last 100 years. That's the farthest mortality. And yet he could live with death, give it all up, not be looking for anything afterwards, see the sadness of it, and yet that sadness added to the preciousness of life, the beauty of life. And I thought, God, that's so true, that's so deep, and it was so beautiful.
And he said that actually we all should feel this way because we all might die, within a few hours, we don't know, but we become so blasé.
Indeed? I should like to know, Madame de Guermantes asked him, how 10 months before the time you can tell us that a thing will be impossible. My dear Duchess, I will tell you if you insist upon it, but first of all, you can see that I am very ill. Yes, my little Charles, I don't think you look at all well. I'm not pleased with your colour. But I'm not asking you to come with me next week. I asked you to come in 10 months. In 10 months one has time to get oneself cured, you know. At this point a footman came in to say that the carriage was at the door. Come, Oriane, to horse, said the Duke, already pawing the ground with impatience, as though he were himself one of the horses that stood waiting outside. Very well. Give me in one word the reason why you can't come to Italy. The Duchess put it to Swann as she rose to say good-bye to us. But, my dear friend, it's because I shall then have been dead for several months. According to the doctors I consulted last winter, the thing I've got, which may, for that matter, carry me off at any moment, won't in any case leave me more than 3 or 4 months to live, and even that is a generous estimate, replied Swann with a smile, while the footman opened the glazed door of the hall to let the Duchess out. What's that you say? Cried the Duchess, stopping for a moment on her way to the carriage and raising her fine eyes, their melancholy blue clouded by uncertainty. Placed for the first time in her life between 2 duties as incompatible as getting into her carriage to go out to dinner and showing pity for a man who was about to die, she could find nothing in the code of conventions that indicated the right line to follow, and not knowing which to choose, felt it better to make a show of not believing that the latter alternative need be seriously considered, so as to follow the first, which demanded of her at the moment less effort, and thought that the best way of settling the conflict would be to deny that any existed.
See, what happens, Swann, is forgotten. It doesn't have this happy ending that we think that that right should prevail. No, Swann is left in the dust, and part of that, again, is his resurrecting Swann. I mean, he's very heroic in resurrecting Swann's memory in this. Swann, why does Swann point him out to tell him what really happened in the room with the Prince de Guermantes? I mean, it's really interesting how Swann selects him to. You have the feeling that Swann is picking him out to tell his story because he sees himself in Marcel. Lots and lots and lots of Old Testament things. I mean, Sodom. I mean, it was so funny his take on Sodom. Well, the Sodomites wouldn't be in Sodom except they'd be somewhere else except in a certain season. It was all quite beautiful how he references this. He goes into these elaborate metaphors about blind Tobit and how like the angel descending and bringing him home, and how he was able to use all these biblical stories but twisting them around to paint his own stories. And because again, the Bible is history compacted. Whole civilizations rise and falls in a sentence, and he kind of did this because he has like a personal narration of history, taking it from this grand historical, and he used those metaphors for his own vision, weave them in.
And I think that he uses the Bible in the same way that as he uses arts and literature.
Exactly.
Myth, I think, are used the same way. Shakespeare, he uses Shakespeare a lot. We didn't mention that.
No,
but he does.
Go on about that, because I wasn't picking up on that so much.
And well, I think that's maybe why the book was translated at one point by Shakespeare by a Sonnet from Shakespeare, because he does refer to Shakespeare quite a bit in the book.
See,
comparisons, or very often when he talks about the theater, obviously, or the fact that male characters were actually impersonating
right.
and so on. So he does refer to that quite a bit.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed today's show with Dr. Michele Magill, Professor of French at North Carolina State University.